Whispers in the abandoned church. The rain fell hard. Thunder cracked through the empty sky. The small town was quiet, almost dead. Most people had moved out long ago. Only a few stayed behind, living in old buildings, surviving day by day. One of them was a man named Caleb. Caleb wasn't rich. He didn't have a big house or fancy things. He lived simply, fixed broken tools, sold scrap metal, helped people when he could. And when it rained, he always looked for new leaks in abandoned buildings, sometimes just to stay dry, sometimes to find something useful. That's why, on this stormy night, he pushed open the heavy wooden door of the town's old church. The hinges groaned loudly. The inside was dark, wet, and cold. Rain dripped from holes in the roof. Dust danced in the air. But something was off. Caleb stopped. He heard it. A sound. Not the rain, not the thunder. It was soft, like crying. He stayed. Still, his boots didn't move. His eyes scanned the broken pews, the shadows in the corners. His heart beat a little faster. The sound came again. Faint whispers, muffled sobs. He stepped deeper inside, quietly. Every creak of the floor made him wince. Then, in the far corner, he saw movement. Behind a fallen statue, something shifted. "Hello?" he said softly, careful not to sound angry or loud. No reply. He moved closer, holding up his lantern. The light fell on something strange. Not human. A shape, crouched and trembling. A pair of wide, glowing eyes stared at him. Thin arms pulled something. Close, a smaller shape, no, two. Two children clinging to her body. She wasn't human, but she looked scared, terrified. Her skin was pale gray, marked with dirt and scars. Her long hair was tangled. Her clothes were torn and wet. The children looked the same, skinny, weak, hungry. She pulled them close, as if Caleb might take them. Caleb didn't move. He raised both hands and knelt slowly. "I won't hurt you," he said calmly. The woman flinched. One of the children whimpered. They didn't understand his words, but they understood fear, and maybe kindness. Caleb slowly took off his coat. He laid it on the floor between them. Then he reached into his bag and took out a small piece of bread and a water bottle. He didn't offer it directly. He placed them on the coat and slid it a little closer, then backed away. Still kneeling, he stayed quiet, just watching. The woman didn't move for a long time. She just stared. Her body was still shaking. One of the children kept looking at the bread. Finally, the smallest one crawled forward, grabbed the bread, and returned to the mother's arms. The woman didn't stop the child. She just watched Caleb, confused. "Cold night," he whispered. He didn't expect an answer. He stood up slowly and stepped back toward the doorway. But he didn't leave. He sat on a broken bench nearby, close, enough to watch, far enough to give space. Minutes passed. The storm outside roared louder. Wind howled through the cracked windows. The children ate slowly as if they weren't sure the food was real. The woman didn't touch the water or bread. She just kept watching Caleb, eyes full of questions and fear. Who was this man? Why hadn't he attacked? Why had he offered help? Caleb leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. He just listened to the storm, and to the small, soft breathing of the frightened family hiding in the dark. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know what planet they were from. But one thing was clear. They were cold. They were hungry, and they were alone. He whispered to himself. No one should be alone in a storm. He didn't know yet, but this was the night everything would change. Not just for her, but for him too. The rain still poured outside, but inside the broken church, there was silence. Caleb had stayed all night on the cold wooden bench. His back ached and his clothes were damp, but he didn't move. He didn't want to scare them again, he just wanted them to know. He meant no harm. The alien woman hadn't slept. Her arms stayed wrapped tightly around her children. Her eyes, Never closed, not even once. Fear lived in her bones. She had seen too much, lost too much. Kindness was a weapon she had never known. So when Caleb gave food and water without a word, it confused her more than it comforted her. She didn't eat, but her children did. Now, the morning light slowly crept in through the stained glass windows. It touched her skin and made her flinch, like it burned. Caleb noticed. She was shaking. Was it fear or just cold? He stood up slowly and walked outside. She tensed immediately. Her eyes darted to the door, expecting someone else to enter, maybe someone worse. But instead, Caleb returned minutes later with dry firewood he had stored under the steps of the church last winter. With practiced hands, he started a small fire in the middle of the stone floor. He used old metal pieces to keep it safe and controlled. The smoke curled upward, escaping through a hole in the roof. Warmth. Real warmth. The fire cracked and danced. The children moved closer to it like little moths, but the mother held them back with her arm, unsure. Caleb saw it, but he didn't speak. Instead, he sat down again, opened a small can of soup, and began heating it over the fire. The smell filled the church. Rich, hot, real food. The woman's stomach growled. She pressed her lips tight, embarrassed. Caleb poured the soup into 3 small bowls, ones he carried with him for camping. He placed them near the fire and stepped back again, still silent, still waiting. One of the children looked up at their mother, then down at the bowl. The older one whispered something in a language Caleb didn't understand. The mother's eyes welled with tears. She hesitated, and then nodded. Carefully, both children crawled forward and began to eat. Slowly, nervously. The mother still didn't move. Then Caleb did something that changed everything. He picked up the 3rd bowl, the one he had clearly meant for her, and walked halfway across the space. Step by slow step. She froze. Her back stiffened. Her hands tightened around the coat he had left. He stopped a few feet away, and then he sat on the floor, cross-legged, and placed the bowl in front of himself. Not hers, his. He took a spoonful, blew on it, and ate it. Then another, and another. The message was clear. I am not trying to control you. I eat with you. I do not touch you. You are safe. She blinked. She looked at the steaming bowl he had left for her by the fire. Then she looked at her children. They were still alive, still okay. Her arms loosened slightly. And finally, she crawled forward. Her legs shook. Her hands trembled. She moved like a wounded animal, not sure if the pain would come again. She sat near her children. They smiled. One of them reached for her hand. She reached for the bowl. Her first sip made her close her eyes. Warm. Real. It almost hurt to feel something good again. Across from her, Caleb didn't stare. He simply nodded once and kept eating. Hours passed. No words were spoken. But trust, in its smallest form, had been born. When the fire dimmed, Caleb stood and began preparing a bed out of old cushions and cloths. He didn't ask. He just made space for the children. Then he made one for her, and finally he lay back down on the bench, far from them. The alien woman watched him, unsure what to think. But in the safety of the firelight, with her children full for the first time in weeks, she whispered a single word. She didn't know the rest of the human word. But Caleb heard it, and his tired eyes opened just a little as he replied softly, "You're welcome." The storm had passed. Outside, the sky was still gray, but the rain had stopped falling. Inside the abandoned church, the soft light of early morning touched the broken walls and dusty benches. A strange warmth now lived in that forgotten place. Not from the fire, but from something deeper. The alien woman had not spoken again. Her lips stayed closed and her eyes remained careful. But something had changed. Last night she had slept for a few hours, for the first time in many days. Not fully, not deeply, but enough to rest her bones, enough to breathe without fear. Her children were different. They woke up with small giggles, their bellies full, their hands reaching for each other's. They no longer cried in silence. The older one tugged playfully at the torn sleeve of the younger, who let out a tiny squeal. Their mother hushed them gently, but her voice held less panic and more softness now. Caleb watched quietly from the bench. He hadn't left. He hadn't said anything to scare them. His body was tired, but his heart felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He stood and stretched, then walked to the fire pit and rekindled the weak flame with a few more sticks. He boiled water again, this time for tea. From his bag, he pulled out dry bread and a small jar of jam, old supplies but still good. He didn't go near them. He placed the food on the same coat he had given them the night before and sat back, as always giving space. The older child looked up at the mother, then at Caleb. There was no fear in his eyes now, only curiosity. Slowly, the little boy stood up. He walked forward. His tiny feet padded over the cold stone floor, his eyes fixed on the jam. He knelt down, scooped a small amount with a finger and tasted it. His face lit up. He looked back at his mother. She didn't move, but her eyes were wide. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She was afraid to stop him, afraid to let him go. But, most of all, she was afraid to trust. The boy took the bread. He didn't eat it. He turned around and walked toward Caleb. Caleb didn't understand what was happening. The boy came close carefully and reached out his tiny hand, offering the bread to him, a gift, a thank you. Caleb didn't take it. He smiled instead and pushed the bread gently back toward the child. "That's yours," he said softly. The boy looked confused, but after a moment, he smiled too. Then he ran back to his mother. She pulled him close and kissed his forehead. The younger child, a girl, now crawled forward too. She had seen her brother safe. She had seen the man smile. Her fear was smaller now. She took the other piece of bread, grabbed the jam jar in both hands and sat by the fire, licking her fingers with joy. The mother followed with her eyes, her heart pounding. She didn't move. Not yet, but her guard was slowly breaking. Caleb decided it was time to try again. He stood slowly and walked to his backpack. From the bottom, he pulled out something special, a small solar lantern. He had fixed it weeks ago. Now he twisted the top, and a warm yellow glow filled the church, brighter than the fire. The children gasped. They had never seen a light like that before. Caleb placed it on the floor and backed away. The girl touched it first, then giggled. Her brother joined, tapping the sides and watching the colors shift. The mother looked like she might cry. Her hands trembled again, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Very slowly, she rose to her knees. She walked, not to Caleb, but to her children. She knelt beside them and placed her hand on the light too. For a moment, all three of them just sat there. Hands, touching the warm glow, eyes shining with something soft. Then her lips parted. She spoke. "You, not Hunter?" Her voice was rough, her accent heavy, but the words were clear. Caleb blinked. "No," he said gently. "I'm not a hunter." She nodded once, then after a long pause she whispered her name. It was strange, soft, and almost like wind in the trees. He repeated it, trying his best to get it right. She looked surprised. Then she smiled, just a little. And for the first time, she asked a question. "You name?" Caleb smiled back. "Caleb," he said. She nodded. The children laughed, and something in the air shifted. Not fear, not sadness, but connection. The night returned with silence. The rain had stopped, but the wind still moved through the broken glass windows of the old church. The flames in the small fire danced quietly. Caleb sat near the doorway, his back against the wall, holding a metal pipe for protection. His eyes stayed open, watching the dark. The alien mother and her children were asleep on a bed made of blankets, cushions, and torn cloth. She was curled around her young ones like a shield, arms wrapped tight. But this time, her face wasn't filled with fear. There was peace. Light peace, but real. Caleb had no plan. He didn't know what would happen next. He only knew one thing. He could not leave them. Not now. Not after seeing how broken, scared, and alone they were. He looked at the fire. It was starting to burn low again. He stood quietly, stepped out the church door, and walked to the pile of dry wood he had covered with an old tarp outside. The air was cold. He picked up a few sticks and turned to go back inside, and stopped. Something was in the sky. A faint red light, flickering, moving. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a star. Caleb's heart jumped. He crouched low and stared. The red light moved closer and closer. Then it slowed. It stopped right above the church. Hovering, silent. No engine sound. No wind. It was watching. Suddenly a soft, buzzing noise came from the back of the light. Then a smaller light dropped from underneath it, falling slowly like a glowing spider on a string. It touched the ground, and it began scanning. A beam of pale light crawled over the earth like fingers searching for something. Caleb dropped the firewood and ran back inside. He slammed the door gently, but quickly, locking it with a metal rod. His breath came fast. He rushed to the woman. She was still asleep, but her children were waking. "Wake up," he whispered. "You need to hide. Now." Her eyes opened quickly. She saw his face, and she knew. Something was coming. She sat up and grabbed her children, pulling them close. Caleb pointed toward the back of the church, where an old hidden storage room sat under the floor. He had seen it earlier and cleared it out. "This way," he said urgently. The woman didn't ask questions. She carried one child and the older one followed. Caleb pulled up the wooden hatch and helped them down. He gave her the solar lantern and whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't come out until I say." She nodded, her hands shaking again. "I'll handle it," Caleb said, though he didn't know how. He closed the hatch gently and placed a heavy bench on top of it. Then he returned to the door. The red light was still above. And now, something else appeared. A shape in the darkness. Tall. Metal, it stepped out of the shadows with slow, heavy movements. An alien drone, humanoid but not alive. Its eyes glowed blue and its arms had strange tools. Scanners, claws, maybe weapons. It walked to the church door, and it knocked. 3 soft knocks, like it knew. Caleb's grip on the pipe tightened. He didn't answer. The door creaked open on its own. The drone stepped inside. It didn't speak. It didn't blink. Its head turned slowly, scanning the space. Its eyes stopped on Caleb. It made a strange clicking sound. Then a voice came from inside the drone's chest. Cold, sharp, machine-like. Human presence confirmed. Life signs. 3 unknowns detected. Target search in progress. Cooperate or be restrained. Caleb didn't move. He didn't speak. The drone took a step forward. Its arm clicked, and a claw unfolded. Then it pointed toward the floor, the exact spot where the alien family hid. Caleb stepped in front of it. "Turn around," he said firmly. "Danger. Alert," the drone replied. "Step aside." Caleb raised the pipe. "I won't let you take them." The drone paused. Then it charged. Caleb swung hard. Metal hit metal with a loud bang. Sparks flew. The drone shoved him back against the wall, its claw reaching toward the floor hatch. Caleb roared and hit again. This time, he hit the drone's eye. It sparked. The machine screamed in static and shook violently. Caleb kicked it in the chest. It fell backward, crashing into the church pews. The firelight lit its broken shell. Then the red light outside blinked once and flew away. Gone. The drone stopped moving. Smoke rose from its chest. Caleb stood over it, breathing hard. His shoulder was bleeding. His legs shook. He looked at the hidden hatch, then moved the bench away and opened it. The alien woman stared up at him, clutching her children, eyes wide with fear. He nodded. It's over, for now. She climbed out slowly, saw the broken drone. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Caleb winced and sat down, gripping his shoulder. We need to leave this place, he said. The woman looked down. Then, in a quiet voice, full of emotion, she said, one word, home. Caleb looked at her, then at the children. He nodded. Yes, my home. The journey from the ruined church to Caleb's home was slow and quiet. The alien woman walked close to him, her children clinging to her sides. The road was muddy, filled with puddles from the storm, but they didn't complain. They were used to worse, much worse. Caleb's cabin stood at the edge of the woods, hidden behind tall trees and thick bushes. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was warm, safe and dry. A fire burned inside. Clean clothes and blankets waited. He had prepared it earlier, just in case. When he opened the door, the alien woman hesitated. She stared at the floor, at the windows, at the bed in the corner. Her body was stiff, ready to run if needed. Her children looked around with wide, curious eyes. The youngest one smiled at the fire. Caleb spoke gently. You can rest here. No one will find you. She nodded, once. Then, very slowly, she stepped inside. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding her children close. Caleb gave her a towel, dry clothes, simple pants and a shirt from his closet, and then stepped outside to give her privacy. When he returned, she was dressed. Her gray skin looked softer now, not as dry and cracked. Her hair was brushed back, and her eyes were clearer. The children were already asleep, curled up together on the rug near the fire. She sat quietly at the table, hands wrapped around a warm mug of water. She didn't speak at first. Caleb didn't rush her. Then, softly, she said, I did not think you were real. Caleb raised his eyes. Me? She nodded. A kind man, a human who helps. I thought those were stories. Caleb gave a small smile. I didn't think aliens were real until I saw you. She lowered her eyes. I was not always like this, hiding, dirty, afraid. He leaned forward a little. Tell me. She hesitated. Then she spoke. I lived on a moon called Vasari. My people were peaceful. We grew food, raised families, traded with other worlds. My mate was a farmer. He had big hands and a loud laugh. Our home smelled like spices and warm soil. She paused, swallowing hard. Then the ships came. We thought, they were traders, they were hunters, slavers, they burned our fields, took our leaders. I ran with my mate and our first child. I was pregnant with my second. Caleb's heart ached. She continued, voice cracking. My mate stayed behind to fight. He told me to run. He kissed my forehead and said he would find us. A tear slid down her cheek. He never came. Her hands trembled around the cup. I gave birth in a hole beneath the earth. No doctor. No light. Just pain and silence. I covered my child's mouth with my hand so she wouldn't cry. She looked toward the sleeping children, her eyes full of sorrow and love. We hid on ships, in garbage, in shadows. I traded old cloth for food. Sometimes I begged. Other times I stole. Many times I was beaten. Caleb's fists tightened on the table. She looked at him. Then we found the old church. It was quiet. Broken. Like me. I thought we would die there. Quietly. Together. Her voice grew quieter. But you came. She looked straight into his eyes. You changed everything. Caleb swallowed the lump in his throat. I didn't do much. You did, she whispered. You saw me. You didn't run. You didn't hurt. He looked at the fire. No one should be left alone like that, especially not a mother. She blinked fast, trying to stop more tears. Then she said, My name is Taliri. Caleb nodded. Taliri. She smiled softly. You say it right. He chuckled. I Tried. For a moment, the silence was warm. Then Taliri reached across the table and gently touched his wounded shoulder. You bled, for us. Caleb nodded. She pulled her hand back, touched her chest with 2 fingers and said in her own language, something that sounded musical and deep. He didn't understand. She translated. It means, you are more than human. You are shelter. Caleb didn't know what to say. Taliri looked at the fire again. I do not know what happens next, but I know this. I will not run anymore. If they come, I will protect my children. But now I have someone beside me. Caleb spoke quietly, but with strength. You won't have to protect them alone. That night, while the children slept and the fire burned low, 2 broken souls began to heal. Not with grand promises, but with shared silence, soft words, and the comfort of being seen. The next morning, the sun peeked through the trees, casting golden light across the forest. Caleb stood outside his cabin, splitting firewood. Each strike of the axe echoed through the quiet, still air. His shoulders still ached from the fight with the drone, but he ignored the pain. He needed to keep busy. Inside, Taliri and the children were waking up. He had never imagined his home would be shared with anyone, especially not an alien family running from something terrible. But now the cabin felt different. Alive. Warmer. Not just from the fire, but from the soft sounds of the children's laughter and the quiet footsteps of Taliri as she cared for them. Caleb finished stacking the wood and returned inside. The children were sitting on the floor playing with a spoon and a tin cup, pretending it was a spaceship. Taliri stood near the window watching them, her arms crossed, her face thoughtful. She turned when she heard the door close. You are up, early, she said softly. I never sleep much, Caleb replied, placing his gloves on the table. Too many things in my head. She nodded. I understand. They shared a quiet moment. Then she asked, Is this really safe? Your home? Caleb looked out the window toward the trees. It was. Until last night. She lowered her eyes. Then we bring danger to you. He shook his head. No, you didn't bring it. They were already looking. Now they just know I care. Taliri stepped closer. You could leave us. No one would blame you. I won't. Why? Caleb looked at her. His voice was steady. Because someone has to care. Someone has to say, enough. Her eyes welled up. She turned away, quickly, and wiped her face. Later that day, they sat together and made a plan. They couldn't stay here forever. Not with drones searching. Not when others might come. Caleb decided to move them to the North Woods, deep territory where no satellites. Worked well and no one came without a guide. He knew the trails. Old survival cabins still stood there, unused and hidden. Taliri agreed. The next morning they left. Caleb packed supplies, food, water, tools, blankets. He loaded a small cart with what he could carry and strapped it behind his old hoverbike. The children sat in the cart bundled in blankets. Taliri rode behind Caleb, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. She didn't speak much, but her silence felt less afraid now. They drove through thick forest paths, across narrow rivers and under hanging trees. The road wasn't easy, but they didn't stop. They moved fast. Caleb didn't want to take any chances. By evening, they reached the first cabin, a small wooden structure hidden beneath heavy vines. It had no power, no signals, just a roof, walls, and peace. Taliri stepped inside slowly, scanning every corner. When she saw it was safe, she motioned for the children to come in. Caleb started a fire and set up a sleeping area. The children immediately ran to the corner and made a little nest of their own. They giggled and piled blankets on top of each other, happy to have a new place to explore. Taliri sat beside Caleb near the fire. You are strange, she said after a moment. He smiled. Most people think that. No, she said seriously. You risk everything for people not your own. I don't see you as not my own, he replied. I see a mother. I see 2 children who deserve better. That's enough. She looked at him for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, My people would have called you Rathi. It means soul brother, not of blood, but of heart. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. I like that, he said quietly. They sat in silence again. But this silence was no longer uncomfortable, it was safe. It was home. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Taliri stood outside the cabin alone. The stars were bright above. She looked up and whispered in her own language. A prayer. Not for safety, but for gratitude. Inside, Caleb watched, from the window. He didn't understand her words, but he understood her heart. And he knew. This was no longer just about saving strangers. This was his family now, no matter what came next. The cabin in the North Woods stood quiet under the silver moonlight. Inside, the fire crackled softly, warming the small room. Taliri was curled on one side with her children wrapped safely in her arms. Their faces were peaceful, eyes closed, lips relaxed. For the first time in many weeks, they were truly resting. Caleb sat near the window with his old rifle across his knees. He couldn't sleep. He had felt it all day. Something in the air. A strange silence. Too perfect. Too still. The birds hadn't sung. The wind hadn't moved the trees. It was like nature was holding its breath. His heart told him. Something was coming. He checked the traps outside earlier, but nothing had been caught. The old motion sensor buried under leaves at the edge of the clearing hadn't gone off. Still, he didn't relax. Then, just past midnight, he heard it. A low hum in the sky. Faint, but real. He stood instantly and turned off the fire lamp. Darkness fell across the room. The children shifted in their sleep but didn't wake. Taliri opened her eyes. She sat up quickly, alert. Caleb didn't need to explain. She saw it in his face. She rose, wrapped the children in a thick blanket, and moved them to the hidden trapdoor under the wooden table. Caleb helped her lower them down. Taliri grabbed his hand. Come with us. I can't, he said. They'll find the cabin empty. They'll search the woods. I need to lead them away. She shook her head. No. You'll die, he smiled softly. Not if I'm smart. And lucky. Her eyes were wide with fear. Please. He placed her hand gently on her chest. Protect them. That's what matters. He closed the trapdoor and covered it with the rug. Outside, the forest began to light up, faint blue pulses flashing between the trees. Drones. Scouts. He had minutes. Caleb grabbed a flare gun, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and ran out the back. He moved fast through the woods, his boots crunching the frosted leaves. He knew this land better than any machine. He led them away from the cabin, leaving false tracks, broken branches, and noises. Behind him, the hum grew louder. He fired the flare into the sky, far from the cabin. Red light shot up, cracking the night open. Almost immediately, drones flew toward it. He was spotted. Human detected, one of them said in a metallic voice. He turned and ran deeper into the forest, zigzagging between trees, jumping over fallen logs. They chased him, but they didn't find the cabin. Not yet. Caleb kept running until his chest burned. Finally, when he was too far to hear their engines, he dropped to the ground and crawled into a hole he had dug weeks ago for emergencies. He lay there, covered in leaves and branches, barely breathing. Above him, the drones circled. One scanned the area. Then, silence. Minutes passed. They were gone. By sunrise, Caleb crawled out, his clothes dirty, face scratched but alive. He hurried back to the cabin. He opened the trapdoor and was nearly tackled by 2 little children who launched into his arms, crying. Taliri stepped out after them, her eyes full of relief. You came back, she whispered. I told you I would. Her hands touched his face gently, brushing away blood and dirt. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "I've had worse." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "We thought you were gone." He looked around the cabin, still standing, still untouched. "They didn't find you. We were lucky." "No," she said softly. "We had you." That day, Caleb fixed the motion sensor, reinforced the door, and added more traps in the trees. But he wasn't just preparing to hide anymore. He was preparing to stay. That evening, they sat together by the fire. Taliri cooked a simple stew using wild roots and herbs. The children played with a new toy Caleb had carved from wood. And then, as the stars came out above the trees, Taliri placed her hand on Caleb's. "I don't want to keep running." He looked at her, surprised. "I want to live," she said, her voice shaking. "Not just survive. My children, they deserve more than fear. And She paused. "I want to believe in peace again." Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at the children, then at the strong, kind woman beside him, then at the dark woods that had once hidden danger, but now protected something sacred. He nodded. "Then we build it here. Together." She smiled. Her eyes glowed softly in the firelight. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Taliri felt like she had finally come home.